during the panel discussion. I will kind of give the word to you, and then if someone wants to pose a question, please do not shy away. Do go to the video, to the microphones here in the room and pose your question so we can include it in our discussion. And then when you're following us online, you can use the comment function to ask your questions, and we will try to feed those into our panel debate as well. So before I start to introduce today's topic and the panelists, maybe a few words why I'm here today. I'm a political scientist, and I've been working on issues surrounding academic freedom since nearly 10 years now. And my interest in the topic got sparked when actually I was conducting research myself. I was gathering data in Egypt between 2013 and 16. As some of you may know who have been working on this topic of academic freedom, during that period, the fellow PhD student Giulio Regeni from Cambridge University was killed by the Egyptian security services. And as I was in the country, as lots of other international researchers were in the country at that point, this was really a shock moment, not only for the international researchers, but also for the domestic ones. This really triggered my interest in the topic. I was, of course, shocked, and I was concerned about the risks also associated to other researchers and their research that they were conducting in Egypt and beyond at the time. And my first impulse as a social scientist was to look for data. So what I did is I tried to find comparative data on academic freedom to understand the context a little better. And when I started looking for that data, I was puzzled to find that apparently scholars had, up until that point, paid very little attention to the empirical study of academic freedom, which is kind of funny because if you think about all the things that researchers collect data on, and then they don't collect data on the very thing that is essential for their own work, that was surprising, at least to me. So the only comparative analysis I found were mainly based on legal texts, and they were very Eurocentric. Basically, there was only comparative studies on European countries or on state level in the US or something like that. I was very dissatisfied with that, and it turned out I wasn't the only one. So I joined forces with a colleague from Free University, Jannis Grimm, and we wrote an article proposing to implement an academic freedom index and proposing some methodological ways of doing that. But we lacked the funds to actually implement it, so it stayed just a paper. A few years later, I was able to join forces with the great team at the Global Public Policy Institute just around the corner. It's a Berlin-based think tank, and we then teamed up with the Varieties of Democracy Institute at the University of Gothenburg and the University of Erlangen-Nuremberg to actually develop a methodology for the Academic Freedom Index and then implement it. And I think until now it is still and remains the only global time series data set on academic freedom. And I'll show you a little bit what it looks like later on. But before we dive into our discussion on how to protect academic freedom, how to support scholars at risk, I think it is time to take a moment to create a mutual understanding in this room and beyond, of course, also for our listeners online, of what academic freedom actually means for today's discussion. Of course, as with a lot of concepts, this is not, there's not the one definition, but what I would rely on is, and I think we do have it on a slide as well, is the definition that the UN Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights has published recently in their 25th comment on academic freedom, and that mentions 5 dimensions of academic freedom. The first one is to protect researchers from undue influence on their independent judgment. The second is the possibility to set up independent or autonomous research institutions and to define the aims and objectives of the research and the methods adopted. The third one is the freedom of researchers to freely and openly question the ethical value of certain research projects and the right to withdraw from those. The fourth one is the freedom of researchers to cooperate with other researchers, internationally and nationally. And the fifth and last one is the sharing of scientific data and analysis with policymakers and the public wherever possible. Now that we have kind of established a common understanding of what academic freedom is comprised of, we can take a look at the data of the already mentioned Academic Freedom Index to find out how academic freedom developed over time. That should be on the next slide. And what we see there, or should see there in a sec, is several graphs where you can see the 5 indicators that actually then, when they're aggregated, compromise the academic freedom index in total. And the 5 indicators that we have, and they somehow mirror some of the definitory points that I mentioned in the last slide from the UN, is the freedom to teach and research, the freedom of academic exchange and dissemination, institutional autonomy, so that's the governance aspect of how a university is run, campus integrity, there it's about the protection of scholars and students on campus, the freedom from surveillance and so on, and lastly the freedom of academic and cultural expression, so how to, the freedom to also engage with a wider public audience. The lines on the graph show us the global average score for each of these indicators since 1900 till today. Similar to other global indicators, for example, on democracy, the levels of democracy in the world, the effects of World War II between 30s and 40s there's a little drop, and also the effects of the dissolving of the Soviet Union can pretty easily be spotted in the global average data. That's in 1990 when the curve goes up. This has, of course, also to do with the number of states that is growing over time, so we always have to be a bit cautious when we interpret such long durée data, but nevertheless, it helps us to identify some trends. And one really worrying trend is when we focus on the very last part of the graph, which is the recent 12 to 15 years, and that is that after a kind of steady improvement on global averages of academic freedom, we have seen a bit of a stalling, and now actually in the last 5 years also a decline of levels in academic freedom globally on average. And this trend is actually accelerating if we look at the very recent data. And if you want to dig around the data yourself, I invite you to check out the website of the VDEM data set. It has some great tools to play around, and you can of course also download the entire data set there. But now let's turn to the political effects of academic freedom. There are at least 3 ways in which academic freedom can contribute to more empowered citizens and freer societies. And those 3 ways are free scholarship and teaching at universities that nurtures critical and independent thinking of its citizens and then allows for them to participate more actively in a democratic society. Second are historical phenomena that we actually know that historically academics as actors themselves, also as political actors, but also universities as spaces and institutions actually have contributed not only to technical, scientific and economic development and advancements, but also have been drivers for political and societal change. This is an often overlooked point. And what we actually can also see when we look at recent protest movements for democracy all over the world is that oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, protest movements are, that students, university students have played an important role in these protest movements. And in that way, they still contribute to pushing regimes all over the world towards democratization. By and large, democracies are more likely to guarantee academic freedom than their authoritarian counterparts. And if we, for example, look at VDEM's index on liberal democracy, which captures the degree and the quality of a liberal democracy, and the Academic Freedom Index, we see a very strong correlation between the two. This doesn't, of course, help us identify the causal direction, but it shows us that there's a very strong relation between the respect for academic freedom and the quality of democracy. Strikingly, in their latest report on the global state of democracy, the VDEM Institute actually found that academic freedom declined in more than 25 of the currently autocratizing countries. And in fact, academic freedom is one of the top institutions and one of the first institutions that gets attacked by authoritarian leaders trying to get more control over their country, meaning countries that are autocratizing, according to the report. To understand how authoritarian regimes negatively affect academic freedom, I want to give you two examples from the COVID pandemic that I think we can all relate to. The first one is from China. We all know that the doctors who actually first reported, so doctors as researchers in the sense, first reported on the outbreak of a new disease in Wuhan. And actually, when we look back at the actions of the state back then in Wuhan and elsewhere, it was an attempt to silence these voices. So they were not, amplifying these voices or taking them seriously and acting upon this new information, trying to distribute this information to their population in order to safeguard them and also to other health professionals, but instead they tried to silence them in order to control the flows of information. And at the end of the day, even some of these doctors were arrested. So that shows you how, authoritarian regimes can undermine academic freedom, and this can lead to really bad public outcomes for the general public. Another example is from Egypt. Also during the COVID pandemic, the government tried to manipulate the numbers because they didn't want such high case numbers in the public reports and in the media. They limited access to testing, but not only for the general public, which was anyway not really able to access testing sites, but also for doctors and medical personnel. And this, of course, led to a huge problem in the medical profession in Egypt, because a lot of doctors either didn't know if they had the COVID, or even if they did have it, they sometimes still went to work. And a lot of doctors actually and medical professionals also, because they are of course at high risks when they're working in these circumstances in a pandemic, contracted the virus, and a high share of them died, a higher share than in a lot of other countries. So these are just two examples, but they neatly lead us to dealing with risks in academic freedom. And they show that these risks still persist. And they're also relevant for international higher education cooperation and science diplomacy, of course. In a way, science diplomacy should probably focus on seeking alliances to protect academic freedom through diplomacy and support scholars at risk to uphold universal principles of academic freedom. While international research cooperation is crucial for innovation, we have to acknowledge that international cooperation also bears risks for academic freedom. Through cooperation between academic institutions, for example, academic freedom can be undermined by espionage, for example, in research areas that produce knowledge that can also be used for military purposes, or surveillance purposes. And then, of course, also through censorship or self-censorship by students or researchers that are funded from foreign governments and are afraid to step too much on their toes. And then thirdly, of course, through intransparent selection or governance processes for joint programs or institutions. These processes can lead to a deterioration of academic freedom even in relatively free environments and institutions. And that is an important thing I think we will discuss also in the discussion. And now we're going to explore how scholars themselves are affected by deteriorating academic freedom with our three panelists that I would ask to join me on the stage now. Tatiana Shitsova from Belarus is a professor at the Department of Social Science in the European Humanities University in Vilnius in Lithuania. Thank you for joining us today. We have Dr. Azadeh Ganjeh from Iran. She's a theater scientist and performance artist at the University of Hildesheim. And last but not least, we have Nicky Diamond from Myanmar. He's a PhD candidate in social and political anthropology at the University of Constance. Yeah, thanks all three of you to make all the way here for this discussion. If you don't mind, I would start with a bit of a biographical question, because I think it would be great for us to understand what it means to be a scholar at risk or a scholar academic in exile, as we've themed the discussion today. Can you tell us about your story? How did you become a scholar in exile? Maybe we start here and then we take a round. Azadeh.
I say hi to everyone, and that's an honor to be here. Also, I feel like this really makes me feel very good to share this experience with everyone here. Maybe that would be a help for other people who are suffering from same stories and situation. So how I became a person in exile is, as an academic in Iran, I'm coming from Iran, as you mentioned, and especially working in the field of arts. There is a very complicated situation happening. It's not only about ethics, morality, and suggestions from the authorities and academic people. It's also about self-censorship, asking you to self-censor yourself, and also asking you to be an organ of this mass body of suppression as a professor in the university. To not only censor yourself, your researches, the hypothesis you want to teach in the university, or the syllabus you want to actually share during your courses, also asking you to become a tool for suppressing the students. It's not only because of the content of what they research on, or the topics, or what they show. It's also about even their personal appearance. Like, I am sure that you heard a lot about women life freedom during last year. And one main problem in the universities in Iran is how you control your students as a professor, how you actually limit their access to open sources, how you actually translate or rephrase things in a way that actually suits with the propaganda. And to contradict with that is a big problem. And I think I actually didn't choose to compromise on my academic freedom. That's the reason.
Thanks for sharing, Azadeh. Do you want to maybe pick up there, Nikki?
Yeah, as you know, I'm coming from Myanmar. Before the coup d'etat in February 2021, I was a kind of the human rights activist and researcher working for the human rights organization called Fortify Rights. I've been with them for more than 5 years, almost 6 years. I was conducting human rights violation committed by the military. So I kind of researcher all the time in, at risk because the military follow me, intelligence and police follow me 24/7 since 2016 and 17 because I was documenting human rights Rohingya genocide against Rohingya in northern Rakhine. And then, so all the time, I always want to be academic because of my activism. I believe like I'm an activist scholar. I want to combine my activism and academic. So, but after the coup, I have been forced to relocate from my hometown to the the safe zone, safe place. And then I was looking for an opportunity where I can get out of my country. And my professor from the University of Constance, she introduced the broken helmet domain, scholar, a kind of student at risk, and I applied, and I got the scholarship, and I'm now here and talking about my experience. Thanks.
Thank you, Nikki. Tatiana, do you want to maybe share your story?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to this highly important event. It will allow me to draw attention to the catastrophic situation with academic freedom in my country. I'm from Belarus. Besides, it will allow us to discuss this topic internationally, both regarding European context and global context as well. So as for my way to this problematic or challenging status, scholars at risk, I faced with this twice, so to say. First time institutionally, and a second time personally. What I mean institutionally in terms that my university, where I've been professor since many years, European Humanities University, it was created just after the collapse of the Soviet Union, so in 1992, in Minsk, in Belarus, and this university, private university, was closed, forcefully closed by the regime of Lukashenko. Why it was closed? Because just because these institutions adhered to the principles of academic autonomy and academic freedom. Therefore, my university was forced to move to another country, and European Humanities University became the university in exile, and now it's de jure, it's a Lithuanian university, so it's university in Vilnius. And so it happened in 2004. And for the long period of time, I personally and my colleagues, we had the chance to live, so to say, between two countries, between Lithuania and Belarus, between Vilnius and Minsk, despite the fact that we continue our academic work at the university in Vilnius. We visited irregularly Belarus and Minsk and organized different academic events for academicians, but also for a wide audience, presentations and so forth. So we were really active in Belarus, despite the fact that the university was in Vilnius. And it was institutional, so how we became institutionally scholars or institutional exile. But then my personal story is connected, of course, with the mass protest movement that took place in 2020. As you know, let me remind about this, that in 2020, the huge, large-scale protest against the regime of Lukashenko took place. It was a protest against the falsifications of the results of presidential elections, and of course against of the unprecedented cruelty and violence used by state authorities, by police. And it's amazingly, but I have to say that thanks to COVID quarantine, so in 2020 and until the August 21, I was in Belarus. So because we didn't have classes, offline classes in Lithuania, I was in Belarus. I actively participated in protests, in different kinds of protest actions. And I had to leave Minsk, as I said already, in August 2021. I didn't want to leave country, but I forced to do it because I have So I have a daughter, small, she goes to school, and it was really very risky to stay in Minsk. And so I had to leave, and since that time I live in Minsk, it's in Vilnius. I continue my work at the European Humanities University. And I'd like to stress that my university provides different kinds of assistance to repressed scholars who leave our country. And since October 21, I've been working in the office of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya as an advisor on education and science issues, and my responsibilities, one of the key responsibilities, is the advocacy for the repressed scholars and searching for different kinds of support for Belarusian scholars at risk.
Yeah. So I think what I heard in all of your three statements was that the university in your country of origin isn't a free space as I described it earlier, right? Where I had this historical example of saying that universities traditionally used to be rather free, rather progressive places where also changes in society could be started, right? Do you have the feeling that this is still the case in your country of origin, or when did it change and how did it change? Maybe you start, Nikki.
Yeah, it is a very tough question. I mean, historically, Burma was a British colony. I would say we never have academic freedom. During the colonial period, so it is the colonial education, it is colonial engineering for administering the Burma state. After independence, maybe I would say we have a little bit of academic freedom in our independence between 1948 and 1962. So in 1962, we have a kind of military coup d'etat. Since 1962 until 2010, we never have a political science and we never have academic freedom. But some people have privilege, like me. They can get out of the country and educated in U.S. and West, like a European country. They fight for the democracy and human rights. But I see a little hope in 2010. We call it a kind of political transition from the military rule to a so-called democracy. So this military open political and freedom and liberalization. But in 2015, as you're all familiar with the NLD won in landslide, and they came into power. And so during 10 years, between 2010 and 2020, is a kind of hope for the whole country, like for the democracy, human rights, justice, everything, and for the future. And then in 2021, February 1st, we have a military attempted the coup d'etat. So I use the word, the term attempted mean that they are still terrorizing the country. They are still trying to control the whole country. So before I leave my country, so military has been, intelligence, police have been hunting me. So because after the coup, I was talking to the international media, local media all the time. And so one of my intel from the military, so I work with the insider all the time. So they give me an early warning, so I should leave the country or I should leave from my home. And then I left. So they were searching me in my neighborhood. So that's why I'm very thankful for the Helmand Domain program, and so that's why I'm the whole family. So I have now 6 year and 3 years old kids and my wife. So we were in the forest and the jungle and running from the city. So academic freedom in overall, according to your question, we never have academic freedom, but we did have a hope between 2010 and 2020. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. How was your experience in Iran, or how would you describe the situation in Iran?
So the institution of higher education actually was established through an autocratic power more than 100 years ago. But but this didn't exactly mean lack of academic freedom by that time, because the elite society or the members of the academia had a voice over the voice of the power. So the power was very much in favor of modernism, and university was known as a very important tool for modernism. Therefore, there was kind of power given to the academia members during this autocratic time of the Iranian history. Afterwards, we had also kind of an occupation by allies during the Second World War. And during that time, the academia was a lot under suppression. Lack of research, lack of giving knowledge to the society, even stopping any activities, research and everything, because there was a lot of problem in the country. Afterwards, we have a new kind of autocracy, which really relies on knowledge, education. Therefore, still, the academia managed to keep kind of its freedom. It doesn't mean that, I would like to say that the higher education institutions were always part of the state and the government. So it's always the ones who are the deans of the university, the minister of education, and everyone is exactly chosen by the head of the state, even if it is a monarch or if it is an Islamic leader. Therefore, there you can see the hands. Yeah? You can see how the suggestions of the state is actually forming everything in the higher education. Then we have the revolution in 1979 and a big explosion of academic freedom. Like everything is very free, debates, giving happenings in the university, a lot of exchanges with other universities all around the world, having many visitors, having a lot of chance to demonstrate and also bring new hypotheses into the university. But it didn't last for long. After the hijack of the revolution by Islamic fundamentalists in a way, in 1983 we have a cultural revolution. And this cultural revolution is a very important stone for complete lack of academic freedom. Many professors were actually arrested, many were forced to exile, persecuted for different reasons. They couldn't ever come back to the university. By that time, it was there was not this kind of privilege of having support from different international organizations. So many of them just vanished into nothing. And also students, because many students were arrested, many were even executed. So we had 3 years of completely closure of academic and institutional activities. And after that, they opened the university, but they always interviewed, investigated background of people who get the chance to come into the university. And it is still the same. So if you are, as a student, if you are accepted to come into the university, this doesn't mean if you are actually scientifically or you are eligible to come to the university, or as a professor, this doesn't mean that you are accepted. There are several layers and filters of having the access to academia as a faculty member or as a student. This is one thing. The other thing is we have a higher council. It is the Council of Revolution. And that was also one of my problems, because I tried to change syllabus of the courses and bring new hypotheses. And if you want to do something like that, everything you do has to go to this council. And this council, which is not exactly the professional or scientific members of the field, they are going to check everything. They are going to actually start interviewing you, interrogating you to know what is the idea behind this change. We also have this several continuous speeches by the supreme leader who dictates what should happen in the academia, what should be the topic of research, what is actually the definition of science these days. So not to waste your time more, I think it shows how academic freedom is happening in the country and in different levels. Also, there is the problem of forcing and injecting members of propaganda inside the institutions. So you are not only facing suppression from the higher authorities, but there are members inside the academia who are actually the arms of suppression. Yeah.
Just one more question for you, because I think this would also speak to what you said, and then you can maybe explain us a little bit about the situation in Belarus. But during the recent protests in Iran, the universities were where a lot of students mobilized, right?
Exactly, yeah. That's really kind of seems contradictory, isn't it? Yeah, because it's still the members of the academia try their best to keep the little amount of freedom that is given to them. Or if they find a gap, they always try their best to become active, to kind of start exchanging freedom of knowledge, freedom of speech also in the university. And I think one reason that right now there's again another cultural revolution or white suppression, how they phrase it in Iran, happening in the university, and it happened during last month. More than dozens, like the recent news said, 60 members of the faculty in different cities of Iran have been dismissed and expelled from the university. This is another cultural revolution. Because what happened during 1983 to 1986 doesn't seem very functional for the state. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the nature of knowledge. Mm-hmm.
So knowledge found a way, but
yes,
now it's
exactly.
been suppressed again.
And we have to, just to mention, I think students are a big force. Mm-hmm. So it's not only the professors and the scholars, and it's also lecturers who are a big force, because lecturers are also people who are less filtered in a way. And they have a less, unfortunately, they are not very much stabilized in the system. So kind of most actions for freedom also comes from them, and they also suffer a lot because of their actions.
Because they're very vulnerable. How was it in Belarus? Because I think I remember that students were also one amongst several groups that were important for the protest movement, right?
Yes, right, you're right, Elias. But let me start with what I'd like to first mention what was the situation before the protest 2020. It's important probably to realize that under the Lukashenko's rule, at least from 1996, the academic autonomy, I mean institutional autonomy of universities, was in any case impossible. Universities were always controlled by the regime. But currently, after the events of 2020, the situation with academic freedom is really catastrophic. Before 2020, also we don't have academic autonomy, but to a certain degree, academic freedom was present. Exactly in terms you defined earlier, academic freedom in choosing topics, in publications, in communication, all aspects you mentioned. It's not the case right now in current situation. You're right that our scholars, students participated in the protests, and because of this fact, students and scientists and scholars have been persecuted and repressed since 2020 and until now, until today. And I'd like really to give maybe more concrete examples how current situation look like in Belarus from the perspective, from the point of view of our issue today, academic freedom. But before I'll do it, I'd like to stress one moment in addition that after the beginning of Russian invasion of Ukraine, new reason appeared why our students, scholars and scientists can be persecuted. It's because of their protest against this war, or because of their sympathy in relation to Ukrainian. So additional reason appeared. And just a few examples, as I said. For example, the Ministry of Internal Affairs and the KGB, actually Belarus is the only country, former Soviet country where we still have this title, KGB. So the Ministry of Internal Affairs and our KGB regularly distribute the list of undesirable or unloyal citizens, employees, who, and then dismissal of this person from the universities rely upon this list. So, and they reactualize this list regularly. And violation of academic freedom in the Belarusian universities starts with violation of basic human rights. Freedom of speech, freedom of opinion and information, freedom of expression, and freedom of conscience. Later I'll give also some very remarkable example to illustrate it. What is a daily routine in the Belarusian academy? To daily routine belong such phenomena like surveillance, regular inspections, and also, unfortunately, denunciations among the academic community. What is remarkable, since 21 at the universities, the position of vice rector for security, this position has been introduced, and these persons, these vice rectors for securities, they are responsible for regular, how to say, cleaning of the staff, чистки, staff purchase, so selection and throwing away unloyal persons. Also very remarkable phenomenon, what happens regularly at the universities happens both to scholars and to students. Representatives of special services, KGBs and policies, randomly, regularly check the phones of students or employees of the university. What is the main goal of these inspections? To identify who violate the order, special order prohibiting subscription to independent media, to the so-called extremist media. The problem is that all independent media in Belarus, almost all independent media, are already have been qualified by state as extremist. And when they check the phones, they just try to identify whether someone made a repost. If you just made a repost of some news published on this by this so-called extremist media, or if person, just students, let's say, just put the like to some post, to some publication appeared at this so-called extremist media, it can be a reason not just for some unpleasant talk with administrator, but really for administrative or even criminal cases. And one more very remarkable phenomenon, it's called so-called repentant videos. Покаянные video in Russian. Let me very short give you a short explanation. Again, representatives of special services, they videotape detained students or detained teachers. And in these videos, the detainers are forced to confess and to repent for the crimes committed, so-called crimes, of course. That's crimes for political reasons. And these videos, these repentant videos, then they are published and spread in different state media channels. And the last topic I'd like to stress and to pay attention, it is a situation precisely with social sciences and humanities. What happens with this kind of knowledge? The diagnosis is pretty clear. The degradation of these disciplines due to the ideological and propagandistic appropriation. So there is no place for critical thinking. Free research and expertise are impossible. And our students and teachers, scholars, they are arrested not only because of their active civic position, because of their political opinion, but also because of their scholarly scientific expertise. I'd like to mention today publicly at least two names. Actually, they are both my good friends. They are political scientists, Valeria Kostugova and Tatiana Kuzina. They both were sentenced to 10 years in prison just for their expertise as political scientists. 10 years in prison, and just recently, in addition to this sentence, they were qualified as terrorists. It has very dramatic consequences in terms of this fast juridical procedure. Of course, you can imagine that education in field of social sciences and humanities in the condition of this regime is also impossible. And again, two very illustrative examples. Propagandist, very scandalous, the most scandalous propagandists become teachers in our universities. And just recently, the Ministry of Education sent a document to one of the university, and in this document, he states that some topics of diploma papers chosen by students contradict, I quote, national traditional values and guidelines of the Belarusian people in the field of sexual education of young people. You can guess probably that it's about gender studies and gender issues. And to conclude, how to qualify what happens in the academy under the current Lukashenko's regime? There is a very good definition. It's securization of academy. It means that academic sphere, academic universities live under the conditions of state of emergency. State of emergency. Why? Because the regime is illegitimate. This power, this regime and this concrete person, they are illegitimate, and therefore the whole situation, it's a situation of state of emergency, and it has destructive consequences for the whole academic sphere.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing. I would like to take the opportunity to invite the audience in the room or also offline to also pose some questions to our panelists or to give a little impetus for the discussion. If there's anyone who wants to go up to the microphone, can you maybe make your way to the microphone? Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for those 3 stories. They are both touching and very inspiring. I have a question to Professor Szycowa. It says in your bio that you're not only an academic, but also an advisor to Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya. And I imagine that that involves planning for the future, for a time when Belarus is hopefully free, democratic, and respecting academic freedoms. And my question is related to what you said about this picture of Belarusian academia right now, where it seems to be in a way torn between those academics and students who are fearless, who take it to the streets, who share their expertise, and those, as you call them, propagandists who follow the line of the Lukashenko regime. And in your perspective, and in the perspective of Belarusian academics that you talk to, what does the future of Belarusian academia at a time when Belarus becomes truly independent look like? Is it, how do you reconcile this rift? How do you build bridges? Or do you build bridges? Do we build bridges? Is that what we're supposed to do? Or are we maybe supposed to just, discard that part of history and those people who were involved with it and start anew? I'm very curious what your perspective on that is. And I suppose, in a way, it's a question to all 3 of you, but I know that you, to all of you, but I know you, Professor Szycowa, work on future more specifically, so I thought I'd ask you first. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe we can give that question actually to all of the panelists, and maybe let me rephrase it a little bit towards a more general question of, how do we, you've all described this very problematic situation of academic freedom in your countries. There are nuances, but I think it is fair to say that academic freedom is not guaranteed in any of the 3 countries we've discussed and you've told us about today. The communities are being persecuted for their work even. And this is also why you 3 had to leave, obviously. So how do you envision a more free future for academia in your country of origin? Let's start with Iran and then move across.
Yeah, okay. I think the change, as you mentioned, like what is happening for the academia is actually at the first step happening against human rights. And that's which is spreaded into the academia as well. So I think a hope for change is a hope for change in a democratic situation in a country. So if there is a democratic situation, which is not actually guaranteeing academic freedom, we all know, but then there would be chances for academic freedom. Not only just something shines somewhere and then gets lost in the darkness, but traces systematic changes in the system, making new structures happening, just to stop the hands of the state on the academia. It's actually happening through the change in the state, in my point of view, or at least in my situation, in the situation of Iran. So you can't think that, okay, we compromise with this state, and this state is actually able to give academic freedom. As you mentioned, when there is a state which is actually illegitimate, there is always this situation of danger of losing the power. And of course, science is actually a very critical power against what these states are facing. These states are states of corruption, and the corruption is happening in every field. It's not only in academia, it's not only in human rights, it's actually happening even in environmental cases. It's happening in the society, it's happening economically. The state of corruption is everywhere. Something is rotten everywhere. So, and academia and members of academia are the ones who always understand that, who acknowledge that, research on it, and want to improve it. So in my point of, I think democracy could be a basic start to have academic freedom.
Thank you, Azadeh. Neil.
Yeah, thank you for the question. In Myanmar, Burma, we also have a similar situation like Belarus and Iran. But let me give you some update that we call what is happening in Myanmar. So after the coup, after military attempted the coup, student activists, dozens of student activists have been executed, killed by the military. So when students go on resistant protests, again, they did a peaceful protest on the street, and military shoot their head like snipers shooting their head and kill them. So according to some data, we have at least more than 5,000 people have been killed by the military. That doesn't count the combat situation. So after the coup, we have a lot of resistant forces against the military who are making their homemade weapons. So a lot of students, they left their school, they left their university, and also professors and academics also left their university. And so some of professors who rejected, who stopped working for the junta, had been detained and interrogated and also sentenced for 10 years, 20 years in prison. So some of the professors and some of the lecturer academic in the Thai-Myanmar border, India border. So that is the kind of what is happening in Myanmar. Every day military junta, so we don't now call the military juntas, they are terrorists. So they are using the practice of state terrorism, using every possible will to control the country. So students, the topic of academic freedom, students are our a kind of fighter who show up in the street, who organize the anti-coup protest movement in early in February, March. And the military kill all these people on the street, and they stop protesting, but they go into the jungle and they become a freedom fighter. They fight for the freedom. They fight for. So in total sense, our freedom, academic freedom, is really doomed. So it's like a hell. The whole country is like hell, and we cannot hope for the future. But I believe in my fellow citizen and fellow student who are in the jungle fighting for the revolution. So some students join, establish their own army, but some students still continuing their peaceful demonstration. And also some are in hiding, some are doing. So I really respect those students, those academic, everyone. So now I'm covering the topic of academic freedom, who are students, who are professors, academic. Yeah, but I believe in my fellow citizens and people because of their strong determination against the military junta. So military junta is still trying to control the country, but I never see they can control it. So Western media, whenever I talk to the European or German, they never know about what is happening in Myanmar. And Western media rarely cover the coverage about Myanmar. So most of the people, how many people have been killed? So it is at least twice higher than people killed in Ukraine. So because of the civil war against resistance against the military. So yeah, that is what is happening in Myanmar, and I hope like one day we are winning in this fight. And sometimes we hope for the best support from the Western country and Western European country, but some people, we have a different context, like Ukraine is the Russian aggressive invasion, but in Myanmar, our own army is killing their own people. So we don't have a support, but I really appreciate people who show their solidarity with our fellow citizens. Your solidarity, your interest in asking about Myanmar is our, yeah, we appreciate. Thanks.
Thank you, Tatiana.
Thank you for your question. Indeed, it's from the moral perspective, it's probably the most difficult one. It's obvious that our education system, generally speaking, and higher education system must be subject of reform. It must be reformed. We hope that we will realize this deep reforming of our education system in nearest future. But you suggest to look at the situation from the perspective of this necessity of how to reconcile different parts of academic community. First of all, I'd like to stress that currently academicians, first of all those who are already in exile, we do discuss this issue, and there are pretty opposite opinions with regard to what must be done, what would be the best decisions. But it seems to me that at least we have to differ between different groups of university people, academicians. I'm convinced that those people, first of all, those administrators who directly, actively, directly participated and continue to participate in repressions, such persons may not either be manager or even teach at the universities. So it's more or less clear for, and there is a consensus with regard to this issue. But at the same time, there are many university teachers who still who continue their work at the state universities and who try, despite all difficulties, who try to keep a certain distance and not to be engaged in this repressive machine that is present at the universities. And it seems to me that most difficult, most challenging task it is these people faced with. I mean, how not to be, not become a part of this, how you said, moral corruption. How, and it's really very difficult because there are so many instruments how administration, how state power can indirectly, but nevertheless involve teachers and students in this system of repressions and system of corruptions. So therefore, there is at least one clear answer that people who participated may not teach or be a manager at the universities.
Thank you.
I would like to add something to that.
Yeah? Okay.
Very shortly.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, like the tenure track system, which is all over the world being used for the professors, is actually being used as a method of suppression. So there's always something to push on the members of the academia to just involve them in this corruption.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. So how the processes at the universities are used. I want to take a short break now from the discussion to listen to the voices of scientists from Cameroon, Afghanistan, and Turkey who have shared their thoughts with us on the situation of academic freedom in their home country. So we get a few more perspectives. And then afterwards we can kind of relate to that in our discussion, or also I want to open the floor one last time after that for the people here in the audience or online to share one more question for the panel.
As a scholar from Cameroon, I try to contribute to a democratic future in the country in two ways. First, focus on my job as a scientist. That means try as much as possible to be objective and adopt a critical approach. Second, ask myself the question, does my work contribute to the development or the erosion of inclusive values in society, such as respect for one another, respect for diversity, and inclusive participation, among others? I believe that these values provide a strong foundation for democratic institutions and a better society everywhere. Academics in Cameroon today face so much scrutiny and even prosecution, especially if their work is on any of the hot-button issues that the country is facing today. As a result, many of them avoid working on such issues. This means they avoid doing the work that can help find solutions and bring about positive transformation in the country.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to discuss about intersection of science and democracy. Personally, I think science can play a role in strengthening democracy by encouraging critical thinking. In Afghanistan, in most families, women are treated like second gender, and the choice of education is not their own choice, it's their fathers, their brothers, and their husbands' choice. Therefore, historically, the journey of Afghan women in science and education has been full of challenges. And I had been through these challenges in a different way. But I thank DAAD for providing me this opportunity to come out of the challenges and pursue my PhD in one of the best universities in Germany, University of Hohenheim, where I can work in equipped and modern laboratories in calm and friendly environment. And I wish this experience for every woman in Afghanistan, hopefully one day in our country. But this won't come easily. You have to be strong, you have to fight for your rights. And the pain you're bearing today, education worth it. And I remind myself every day, where there is no hope, there is no change. Be hopeful.
Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well. I'm sorry for not attending this very meaningful meeting, or maybe I'm already among you. In general, the life in Turkey is not good. There are human rights problems and severe economic crisis. Because of these, most of the population is not happy. And this, unfortunately, is getting worse over time. I consider President Erdogan is slowly to blame for this, since his regime, also known as totalitarian or his dictatorship, has been ruling the country for the last 20 years. While the life in the country is already hard, it is even harder for the opponents of the regime and the hardest for the Kurdish opponents of the regime. If you're not a regime supporter, it is almost impossible to be employed in a public servant. Not your qualifications, but your opinions about the regime matter. This applies to all levels of the public sector and the large part of the private, because if the capital owners don't want to be seen as opponents of the regime. In this context, in the academia, there is a significant amount of poorly qualified people, and in these circumstances, it is extremely hard even to think about the academic freedom. Academics cannot do or do not criticize their colleagues or deans, let alone the regime. If they would do that, they can easily lose their job with a complaint from a regime-supportive colleague or a student. This problem can also be seen in academic work. While some find a way not to mention the wrong policies of the regime in their writings, others interpret or falsify the fact in favor of the regime. In that way, they keep their job or even get promoted. The academics who try to do the right thing are, of course, miserable in their conditions in every aspect of their lives, especially because they can hardly do anything. Not even the biggest oppositional political party can do something anymore, because the regime has all power. Still, the opponents in the country do their best to tackle the challenges. Many of them had to leave the country to be able to do their work, including me. We, who believe in democracy, show the world what the regime really stands for. And by doing so, we also put pressure on stakeholders in all fields to act against the regime and in favor of people. Sooner or later, we will win, because we are right. Thank you for your attention.
One of the prominent negative effects of life in exile is that the time, energy, and focus of the person are divided between new realities here and the realities and changes back home, and constantly trying to manage both sets of realities and have them connected. That's not easy and sometimes even impossible, and requires a lot of sacrifices. That's my story. I have been an educator most of my life. I have taught at Afghan universities where I was not just teaching, but was also a strong advocate for female higher education and encourage my female students to use higher education as a strong tool for women empowerment. And today, when I wake up to the horrible fact that the Taliban has denied women and girls the right to secondary and higher education, and there is no academic freedom, no female engagement in academia, in Afghan academia at all, breaks my heart, makes me depressed, and the thought of not being able to change the situation, to make it better, something that I was always a huge part of, consumes me to the extent that I cannot allocate properly my time, my energy, and focus the new realities and the new plan and the changes that I have here in exile. And I guess that is the reality of every person that has been active in her or his homeland and is now in exile, being split up between two sets of realities, changes, and challenges.
So, after these quite impressive impressions from 3 other countries on the state of academic freedom, but also with the last statement on the situation of academics in exile, before giving the last chance for the audience to raise a question, maybe one more thing. What do you think academics in exile can do to improve the situation of academic freedom in their own country? Maybe just brief round of answers, and then we give the opportunity to the audience for a final round of questions. Let's start with Tatjana this time, the other way around.
Yes, good questions. Actually, a number of things already have been done, and so this work continues. First of all, we can, scholars in exile, we can initiate different mentorship programs for students, for those students or teachers who are still in Belarus, either still in academy or maybe already without job, but nevertheless have certain hopes for possibility of professional self-realizations. We can try to find opportunities how to engage our colleagues who from Belarus, who are in Belarus, how to engage them in different professional networks, how to help them to get access to, let's say, libraries, to different academic resources, and to help them to be engaged in different international research projects. Last but not least, to find possibility of financial support. For example, I can just give example of one of cooperation with one foundation which supported several research projects that were realized in Belarus by Belarusian scholars. And so I'm really happy that I contributed to this, to realization of this opportunity. So thanks to this, so to my certain efforts and to these particular foundations, despite of repressions and despite the loss of jobs, certain number of scholars received possibility to this professional self-realizations. So it seems to me that two things are crucial. Financial means just to survive, and also a possibility of professional self-realization. It's crucial, and scholars who are in exile can really help with this.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really a great question. For me, being exiled away from my home country, when and why my fellow student, professor, lecturer have been killed, arrested, tortured, interrogated by the military. So I feel it is a kind of a shame, privilege. It's my negative feeling. But at the same time, I feel like it is an opportunity, motivation. So I must survive, and I have to work for my country. So there are still people in the country. One day they need me. So while I'm away from my country, I'm obtaining my world-class education, and also I expanding my network. I mean, living in exile is not easy. I mean, I still have anxiety, constant worry about my future. But I live with that, with a hope for my country, hope for the future. That's, I'm still surviving. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Azadeh.
I really share the same ideas, and I really share the same feeling, especially in the first few months that I was away and the uprising happened in Iran. I think it is a lot to ask from an exiled person to stay actively engaged with helping his or their country back home to have academic freedom, but it's not something impossible. So I believe many people who come to exile, as some of the fellow members of Exile mentioned, really suffer from a lot. But one thing which is very important, and I feel sitting here, I'm using this privilege, is actually institutional support from democratic states, democratic situation, civil society support. There is a need for an institution to acknowledge your position as a person in exile, and then give you some sources, some opportunities to help people back home. Because exile could be like a one-way street, which only takes you far and far and far, distance and distance and distance. But why? Because you have to survive. So if you have help, if you can make this kind of community out of your country, this community can be a national, international, diverse community of civil powers involved. Then you can be able to survive, then you can be able to actually become active again. Because the reason you are actually persecuted to exile is they didn't want you to be active, and it really works, believe me. So you need some help, of course, and it is not something which one person or a community of exiled people can actually hold on their shoulders.
Yes.
And I think what is happening right now, what is happening with Philip Schwartz initiative, with Hilde Domin, which really helped during the uprising with many students and scholars who were deprived from their right of academic knowledge and freedom, is actually one important source of power. What can make it more effective is to use the person in exile to actually become active in the structure of these organizations. So I believe there is a need to make a third space for people in exile. And then this third space, getting back to Baba, Homi Baba, I think this third space, the hybrid space of the person in exile and the new life, as she mentioned, is able to actually nourish and generate new ideas for people back home who need it. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you.
May I add one short moment? I absolutely agree that it's crucial to maintain communication, but also very important to provide publicity, to inform international audience about our academic political prisoners, about our students' political prisoners, and about all these crimes in academic sphere that happen in our countries.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I want to give the audience a chance to come in, either online, please use the comment function, and if it works out, we can take up your question, or in the room if there's anyone who wants to use the microphone. Anyone wants to come in with a question, feel free. Otherwise, I do have more than enough questions on here to fill the last minutes, but you can still raise your hand. I'm going to pose my next question if you want to make up your mind, and you can still use the microphones in the next minutes. Just give me a heads up so I know. So one more question I have that maybe also comes from the recent discussion that we have about what we can do or you can do as scholars at Exile, and now I want to kind of go the way that you went, and Azadeh, when you talked also about the support of institutions abroad, right? And I want to pose the questions to you, the panel here. How can, you know, institutions in democracies support scholars at risks? What can they do? And what are pitfalls to watch out for? What can they do in terms of science diplomacy? What can they do in terms of normal diplomatic means? What can they do in terms of higher education cooperation? We didn't touch upon that so much yet. Would love to pick your brains on possibilities on how to support scholars in exile and academic freedom in these dimensions from these actors. Want to start?
Okay, well, it's a good question, but at the same time, I feel very a kind of the emotion from the European response for my fellow professor, lecturer, student. They stuck in the border. They left their university. They stopped working for the military regime. So they are very determined, but nobody picking them. So, but if you look at the data from Belarus, Ukraine, so European countries, they host them, they provide space, they provide everything what they need. But my fellow students, they left their university, they left their school because they don't want to support, legitimize the military junta and the coup d'etat. But only a few people who have a privilege. I mean, I know my connection, I have my professor, I have my network. That's why I can get out of that situation. But there are a lot of students, there are a lot of people stuck and who cannot continue their education. So one of my requests is, I mean, you cannot change your government policy, but still, I mean, thinking about humans like, I mean, Ukrainian people or Belarus, and they are human. Also, Burmese people are human. So whenever I study the Constitution of Germany, so there is a human dignity in the clause that changeable, amendable. So we also, Burmese, also have our human dignity, and also we deserve to, save and get out of the country. I mean, people, student and professor who left who's still in the country, who decided to fight against the military region, Hunter, that is their decision. But there are also some students, some professor, lecturer, scholar who cannot live in the country and looking for their way out, but they stuck in the border, like a Thai-Myanmar border in Maesao or in the jungle, or some professor or lecturer I know, they are walking in the chicken farm in the Thai-Myanmar border, in the Thailand side. So those people are hopeless. They didn't get any support from the European country or Western country. So my best hope is humanity. I mean, when the academic freedom is declining, democracy is declining, I mean, and also humanity also declining. So we need these scholars, I mean, to train, to get the training for the academic is not easy. To become a PhD is not easy. To become a scholar. So sometimes if they are wasted, I mean, if they end up in their life in the jungle or the border, who cannot get out of these situations. So we are losing our human resources. And I mean, one of the dreams, a hope I have is one day we can rebuild our country. We can rebuild my country. And then, I mean, so those scholars, activists, I mean, students needs to be saved and supported. At least show your solidarity to how they can survive under that kinds of very tough circumstances. Sorry, I mean, these every deal I'm struggling, all these every deal since 2021, I received the messages, video footages, all their situations. So military right now, they are using airstriking, aerial bombing, so sending the troop in every part of the country. So every part of the country except from the major city. So the whole country at war, like Ukraine. But nobody knows about what is happening inside the country. So every student who wanted to go to school, they have a right to education, but they cannot continue. Like Belarus example, military send their propaganda, their own professor to the university to brainwash these students who still going for the university. So they have been brainwashed, and also different kinds of situations. I mean, this is not the panel about my country, only about the academic freedom. So I have a limitation to cover topic connected to the academic freedom. But if you're interested in Burma, what is happening right now, you can ask me a question. But the country is in really bad shape right now. Everything is really chaos and the hell right now.
Tatiana, what do you think are options?
Well, as repressions in Belarus continue, academic immigration continues as well. In light of this fact, we have to, it makes sense to defer to basic types of possible assistance. One is humanitarian assistance, and another is professional assistance. Lithuania and Poland, these two countries provided amazing, incredible humanitarian assistance, but it's much more difficult to find for scholars in exile possibilities for professional self-realizations. Therefore, I call international academic community, and doing so I continue what my colleague just expressed. I call to pay more attention to this necessity to keep up and to maintain personal dignity, which consists in professional dignity as well. The very possibility to realize himself, herself, as a scholar, as a teacher, as a translator, as a researcher, etc., or as a students, to have a chance to get a good educations in history, in philosophy and political science and so on. So we do need international support, but not in terms of considering scholars in exile in terms of victimhood and in terms of providing humanitarian assistance. I hope, at least at this audience, such phrase like academic solidarity, it's something pretty understandable. It's a European value, and no, I hope not only European, again back to what colleagues expressed. So I would stress this necessity that in line with humanitarian assistance, we are deeply grateful for, but there is also professional dignity, and there is always hope that despite the fact of being an exiled, our scholars could find possibility also to be scholars, to be scientists.
Thank you. Azadeh.
I can't agree more with you both. I would also like to mention, as you mentioned, immigration. We always have a fear of brain drain back home. New generations come, they want to get into the university, new generations with access to open sources. So one thing that we can do is to provide open sources. As you mentioned, also mentorship. But this is not only through people in exile, but also through universities in democracy. Universities can provide open sources. In my country, it is not easy to access to JSTOR or other sources. So you can open it. You can open it for all the students. And I don't mean that you have to open it for a particular group of scholars, even open it for propaganda members, because knowledge has effect. And I believe if they have open access, it will change something. There is something happening inside. There are some data which come and you can't ignore it. At least you have to acknowledge that you know something at the moment. So open sources, I think, is very important. The other thing I think is, yes, a scholarship, humanitarian help, and everything, but it's also the chance for people who are actually exiled from academia inside the country to build something. There are some groups who are doing it, like academia in exile, academics in exile, like there's another group which is emergency exit happening in Salzburg, another university. There is a big group in art field that they are giving actually credits and license to students from Hungary who doesn't want to actually study in this kind of autocratic system. So it is possible to establish this kind of open academies for people who are still inside, use the knowledge of expelled lecturers, expelled professors who are not able or don't wish to leave the country, and give support from us or international institutions to them. The other thing which I think is very important, we all know that most of these illiberal regimes are still in cooperation with European universities and higher education institutions. This is also very, very complicated. I don't find myself in the position to really talk about the morality and ethics of these cooperations, which every step forward for science and freedom and improvement is really very valuable. But I think if you have a cooperation with the university, bring always the names of the suppressed people on the table. Always mention, for example, Nilufar Bayani or Saeed Madani from Iran when you have a cooperation. Always mention your fears of suppression. Always question if the structure is actually working in a democratic way. Maybe not, but pose the question, because this is important. Bring always the question on the table. Make them fear of being suppressive. Make them think that they are in danger. Don't give them safe haven. And still cooperate, because your cooperation has effect on science. Of course, there's also the danger of misuse of knowledge. There's also a danger of misuse of data and all these things. But as I said, I'm not in the position to talk about this very complicated situation. What I think is solidarity in every aspect, institutional and also civil society.
Thank you. One last chance for the audience to come in, raise a question to the stellar panel that we have here. I don't see anyone raising their hand right now, so I would continue to draw maybe to a close with a last round of replies on this question of what the university can do. And by this, of course, I don't mean the university in your country, because from what we heard, most of those are very controlled by the regimes, so they cannot be considered really like actors in and of themselves that can act as institutions against these regimes or improve the situation. But what do you expect from your host institutions? What do you expect from universities in the European Union and beyond, how they deal with universities in your home country, how they deal with the partnerships that might have been, established already before this recent crackdown? Of course, the situation wasn't great before, but maybe there was, as you said, for a few years there was some hope. So maybe some of the corporations were established then, but then due to the changes in the political atmosphere and due to the repression, situation changes. Should they rethink their cooperation? Should they hold it? Should they put conditions on the cooperation? Should they look for other ways of cooperation beyond institutions, more on the networks of individual researchers? What can they explore, and what's their responsibility in this? Maybe we can have a closing round on this question. I'll give you the floor first.
Oh, thank you. And according to current situation in Myanmar, and according to my analysis, university professor lecturers really oppressed. They don't have any freedom. They cannot. So everything is under control by the military regime. But we still have a hope, like people, student, lecturer, anyone who stopped working for a hunter, they are stuck in the border, and they should get support. They should get some kinds of any support to relocate or to have a research grant. So in my view, in my thinking, we cannot move 50 million people out of the country, and a lot of people are still engaging in resistant forces and fighting back, fighting against the military junta, and we are winning. But during the war, during the conflict, during the violence, so everything is damaged, mentally, physically, everything. So to rebuild from my country, education, university from ashes, so we need a human resource. So that's why I believe in education. Education is the key to build my country, to build nation state, to build state building. So one thing what we can do, from the European country or government, is to give the more scholarship, to provide more networking. So between 2010 and 2020, a lot of European universities go into Myanmar, and also they conduct a lot of projects supporting a kind of capacity building for the university, professor, lecturer, everything what they can. But one of the idea is that they shouldn't stop. They should still communicate with their contact. But one of the situation is that every country except China and Russia, so there's no country except from China and Russia giving a legitimacy no country. There's no country recognizing the military junta. So that's great, but it doesn't mean university and NGO or civil society from the West cutting the connection with their contact in Myanmar. So we have a kind of a dilemma situation. Who stopped working for the military, they still need, and also who decided to continue working for the military. So actually they are skilled because their family has been terrorized. One situation, a professor stopped working for the university, for the military junta, arrested, interrogated, and imprisonment for 20 years. That kind of decision she made, and then she got the 20-year imprisonment. So that kind of terrorizing, using the terror as a campaign by any means. So in this situation, they need a lot of support, solidarity, and sometimes I don't criticize or tell anything, but I just try to listen. Whatever they keep telling me, I try to listen to their story, and then try to, so I don't want to talk a lot, but what you can do is, whatever you can do, don't ask me, I cannot offer you a solution, but individual, like you can start like a kind of responsibility. We are fellow human, and when we need help, when we need support, if you realize their own responsibility, that is what we need. And also in Germany, in Berlin, what I hear is a German Myanmar Solidarity Foundation, Exile, and also they are educating German people, showing documentary film and movie and educating about what is happening in Myanmar. If you show up those events and try to get connected with people not working, one day you will have, or we will have a solution, how we can support the people left behind in the country or in border. So the war in my country will be finishing in 2-3 years. We don't know how long it will be. So during the conflict, violent war, so we cannot rebuild we have to find a will. So that will be a tough job for me and everyone. Thanks. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Tatiana.
After the events of 2020 and certain events in my country which happened in 2021, the participation of the Belarusian universities in Bologna process has been interrupted, and it has consequences that as a next step the decision was made by most of international European universities and academic institutions to interrupt, also to stop cooperation with state universities. And I support this decision. My position with regard to this issue is to support concrete people, not the system, not to support this corrupted system of how universities functions, how they operate as a part of oppressive regime. Unfortunately, it's a fact, but to support concrete people. And it means, first of all, that we do need scholarships for our youth, for our students, to enable their education at European institutions, first of all in field of social sciences and humanities, but it can apply also to scholars, to teachers, but in this case, I would add that it would be necessary to realize appropriate verification procedure, so that we have to care about it, to escape the situation when corrupted scholars, corrupted professors who participated in organizing repressions against their students to escape the situation when this kind of persons will receive some international support. Therefore, I would be in favor of supporting scholars, even those who work at the state universities currently, but we need very precise verification procedure. And at the last moment I'd like to highlight within our discussion today, when we talk about cooperation between, let's say, European academia with Belarusian scholars, also with Belarusian scholars in exile, I'd like to stress that let's change perspective. Until now we discussed the situation only from one perspective, from the perspective this group of scholars need help, need assistance. But let's change perspective. What does their presence, what does the very fact that numerous Belarusian scholars currently are in European Union, what does it mean for European academic context? I would say that it means it enables possibility, it enables changing perspective on Belarusian society and on Belarusian culture. Thanks to cooperation with Belarusian scholars in field of history, sociology, political sciences, and so on, thanks to cooperation with my colleagues who are currently in exile, European, Western European scholars have a chance to decolonize, in a way, their own way of perception of what is for many years considered as a typically Belarusian culture, typically Belarusian politics, and so on. It's let's use this chance to reshape our joint understanding of one another, and for Western scholars it's a chance to, through cooperation with scholars from so-called Eastern Europe, it's also polemical conception, through cooperation with scholars from Ukraine, from Belarus, to reshape our vision of the region as such and our vision of Europe. It's probably the additional thesis I'd like to bring to our discussion today.
Thank you, Tatiana.
I make it really short.
That's okay. We still have some time.
Yeah, I think I just want to add something. A person in exile, exile is not a privilege, exile is not romantic, but a person in exile could be a treasure, as you mentioned, and especially in academia. So it's an educated person, it's a knowledgeable person, it's someone who actually knows a lot about the backstage of a system, who was involved actually in a very structuralized part of the system, if you have been a member of the academy, a member of the faculty. And I think one thing is to, as I mentioned before, to generate hybrid spaces. I don't mean that bring them into your space, like this Eurocentric, Western-centric space, but to generate a new hybrid space, a space which is made through the collaboration of both sides, a space which can actually flourish new things. That's what I think could be very... And it could have happened both in the administrational sections and also institutions. So it should happen in different levels of the structure.
Elias,
yeah, please.
before I forgot, actually, along with our revolution in Myanmar, we also have a new institution, like a new university, mostly run by the exiled scholar and diaspora professor from US, Europe, and they are establishing new institution, a kind of alternative education, what what my fellow citizens could not get the quality education from the military regime-run university. So they are also establishing. So revolution in Myanmar is very, somewhat people claim like very innovative. And also they are also preparing for the future. Like, so education shouldn't be dead by the hand of the military, but also providing the alternative education. So in this sense, European, should support. And one of the problems I've seen is the credit and a kind of European country and university, they don't recognize their diploma and degree produced by those online university and something like that. So that kind of a problem. But so some university, they are finding the will to get out of that stuck. But my recommendation, one recommendation is, I don't know the audience, but at least we should have, you should have some kinds of university try to communicate with those newly established university and institutions. So those are our alternative and future for the new Myanmar.
So don't just continue cooperations that have been established with state universities, but rethink cooperation and try to focus on individuals and on alternative new institutions. That, and then also help them not only financially and so on, but by recognizing their work, right? By looking out, by trying to integrate them in your networks, by trying to support them institutionally, and also by recognizing, for example, the credits that they give to students and so on, so that their students could, maybe if they have a chance, receive a scholarship or a place for studying abroad, or if they want that, if they want to pursue that path. I think with that, we can bring it to a close. We've, I think, taken a lot, or I personally can definitely say that I've taken a lot from this, also for my further professional work on this issue. I hope this is the same for the people here in the room and also beyond who joined us online. I think it's maybe time to thank the discussants here, the speakers, and the team of the Futurium, and of course also the supportive organizations, DAAD and the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation for the support of this discussion today. And yeah, I hope we sparked your interest in this topic that might not be so central to most of our political debates. I think academic freedom still has a niche existence to some extent, especially with respect to kind of when we discuss authoritarian contexts and so on. Then we look at the protests and the protest violence, right? This is what makes it to the media. But the consequences for students and scholars don't necessarily make it to the frontline news. So I think it's important to use spaces like this to talk about that and to continue talking about that. And I respect and admire your courage to come here and talk about that. I hope, wish you all the best for the future, and let's continue the fight for academic freedom. Thank you very much.
Thank you.